We are gonna start it off with the flame tank, obviously, still an S tier, like, it is insanely good. We don't have to talk about it, I glaze that thing every single chance that I get. Flame tanks are just a must that you have to get every single game. Now, for Germany, it's even better because they can get flame tanks earlier. For every other nation, it sucks a little bit more because you have to build the land warfare facility, and that will actually delay you. But, I mean, it's fine, you only waste like 1.5 civ factories for the IC, so it's okay. It's worth it for every single country, regardless of the additional cost. And that's also one thing I want to talk about before we get into ranking every single thing here. I will rank these from the eyes of a miner, because you do know I love mine. You know, those that don't have 300 factories by the time World War II starts, those that don't have 5 research slots, and access to every single resource in the world, because for those it actually matters to get the most out of the research, resources, and factories. If you play Germany, sure, you can rush the land cruiser and the nukes, and it's not gonna impact your gameplay at all, because you have so many research slots and research boosts. But many nations don't even have enough steel for 10 guns, or 4 research slots. Some even only have 3 research slots, and for those, all of this is actually a big problem. With that in mind, I will rank these. If something is so good that even without research and factories, I would like to get it, it's an S tier. A tiers, I will research if the game takes longer. B tiers, if I fancy a different playstyle. And C tier is frankly incredibly situational, and F tier I don't even want to talk about. Which is actually the Stronghold Network. That is something that I don't even want to talk about, but I'm gonna humor you regardless. Now, the Stronghold Network costs 20,000 IC. You get a statewide buff for 10% more supplies, 10% more enemy division attrition, and fort construction bonuses. And technically you also get more fort levels. But the big problem with this thing is just you use 20,000 IC and then you still have to build the forts. The thing is just, I don't see myself ever needing that. Sure, forts were nerfed that you can only build a certain level depending on the terrain type. You know, mountains only get 4 and such. Against the AI, you don't need more than the basic forts that you have. And before you get the Stronghold Network, you can also just get the basic fortifications to get a little bit more capacity. Now, you can make the argument that you do get 10% more supplies, but you know what else costs 20,000 IC? A supply hub! Just build one of those instead. And we haven't even talked about the worst thing yet. That occupies a building slot. Instead of building a factory, a refinery, a nuclear reactor, you waste a building slot on this trash thing. If it gave you defensive bonuses or AA bonuses, then I'd be like, okay, feel free to waste 20,000 IC on it, but it doesn't even provide that. You know, if you want to play as Switzerland and just hole up, sure, it's gonna be fun. You get more enemy attrition and all that, but you don't need to research this, please. If it was cheaper, for 2,000 IC, I'd be like, okay, that thing is kind of useful because of the supply, and you don't waste that much on forts. But like, I mean, the best thing about the Stronghold Network is the research boost construction you get during development. Anyway, let's move on to another F tier. The Multicharge Large Caliber Gun. Same as the Stronghold Network, this thing costs 20,000 IC. These are the old rocket sites, which means you can use them for strat bombing the entire time. Now, I personally will say I don't like strat bombing. It can be useful, but I just don't like the strat bombing playstyle. But for the 20,000 IC, and once again, wasting a building slot, you get this beautiful rocket site that will indefinitely, forever and ever, keep on sending rockets on a very shite range. But with this one, we can attack the Benelux and Denmark and our own territory, I suppose. And then if we use this, we get the glorious benefit of 0.2 strat bombing. Look how much this hurts. It actually really... Ow! How will the Dutch ever recover from this barrage of endless damage? If it were cheaper, I honestly could see myself building this thing from time to time. Or if it gave anything else except for the building, but it just doesn't do that either. And the Schwere Gustav... I will say that actually has some benefit, but not because of the Schwere Gustav itself, rather the fact that it gives you the super heavy railway gun module, which will give you the most amount of soft attack and breakthrough for your land cruiser. So for that, it's actually worth it to get. Although, I mean, the land cruiser will also perform without it. The super heavy railway gun is honestly just 2 railway guns wrapped together, because it just has double the IC cost, double the resource cost, twice the range. It has more fort bombardment, and only one of these can help in a battle, so technically it is better than the railway gun, but it still has the big problem of having the railway gun AI, so even though it doesn't have to reposition this often because of the additional range, it's still gonna be absolute ass. Now, it's still kind of fun to use, and mean, it's a big fucking gun on rails. Just from a fantasy standpoint, that's actually amazing. And just so we spread everything out, the military engineering vehicles, they're gonna be put into A. I personally don't really care for any of these companies except for the assault engineers. Technically, you can use the other ones. Like, for example, with the maintenance, you can create some funny scavenging divisions. But for me, it's just too much IC and also too much research to invest into something like that. Instead of, you know, just getting proper tech yourself. And I'll continue treading on some very shallow ice by saying that I also don't like the super heavy howitzers. Again, very expensive because you need 2 land warfare points, and the only one that has a land warfare facility and a land breakthrough point is Germany, and I'm ranking these for minors because for Germany it doesn't fucking matter. They're super heavy and self-propelled howitzers because of that are a B tier for me, because the super heavy artillery technically are slightly better in terms of stats here, but also much more expensive. Now, you can't see it on the left, but you can see it in the combat stats because this tooltip is often bugged, so just ignore the left one and just take a look at the right combat stats. And personally, even if it was cheaper to research super heavy artillery, I would still go for tanks because tanks are just better, more cost effective than artillery. And I build artillery as well. I am often lazy and I like to use artillery, but artillery is not cost effective. Again, the hardest to rank is the land cruiser. Yeah, A tier is fine. Now, the land cruiser is very expensive and requires a lot of research and takes a long time. But if it's out, it's very strong. And if I know the game will take longer, then a land cruiser is already on the table. The nuclear reactor, I mean, can't really rank it if I'm being honest. For the very simple reason that this only unlocks the nuclear reactor. So technically it is an F tier. In reality, the nuclear reactor does have a couple of interesting things going for it. Now, when you research the nuclear reactor, you get the choice between going for a heavy water and a normal nuclear reactor. And this is something that a lot of people seem to get mixed up on Reddit. Because they all say, oh, the commercial nuclear reactor is much slower than the normal reactor. And no, it's not. It's the heavy water one that's slower. Because the tooltip in the game is actually kind of ass. We're going to take a look at the text files instead. The nuclear reactor costs 30,000 IC. The heavy water reactor is a little bit cheaper, but these are the important modifiers. The nuclear production factor and the thermonuclear production factor are the amount of nukes that one reactor will produce, and the SP nuclear bomb and SP thermonuclear bomb speed factors. These are bonuses for research. The nuclear reactor and the commercial nuclear reactor, they are pretty much the exact same thing. The only difference is that the commercial reactor is more expensive, but gives you state modifiers and does not give you the research bonuses. The commercial reactor also says consumer goods factor, but that is either something that Paradox played around with, or this is right now a bug, because this thing is commented out. The consumer goods factor will not actually change anything. And we can see that if we switch over to the Netherlands, they do have one civilian nuclear reactor. And if we take a look at our consumer goods, that actually does not change anything here. This is potentially a bug. I assume it's not a bug and it's just something that they wanted to have earlier. And instead they have the state modifiers, which you can see here. Because of this civilian nuclear reactor, we get more factories in the state, more local available resources, and more local construction speed. And to get back to the nuclear reactor, I have researched the nuclear reactor here already with Ireland, and they do get 1.05 nuclear bomb project research speed. And if we go ahead and just build 2 nuclear reactors, this will jump up to 1.15 nuclear bomb project research speed. And once we research that, the same thing goes for the thermonuclear bomb. This was just a small excursion into the actual reactors because nobody seems to know how they actually work. I mean, I could make a new tier with can't rank. I'm gonna put it into A tier because you do need it for nukes, and I will rank it based on that. Because if I do get nukes, I will also get the nuclear reactor because I have to. Now, the commercial reactor we're also gonna put right next to it. Technically, it is slightly better. As I said, it is 5,000 more expensive and doesn't give you the research bonuses, but the research bonuses you won't need anymore because you should probably get the nukes first anyway. So you already have the nuke research, and then you get for 5,000 IC, you get statewide buffs, and depending on who you play, that actually matters because more resources, more construction speed, more factories, or it's also just useless because by that time you don't need it anymore. And we are just gonna put the nuclear bomb and the thermonuclear bomb also into A tier. Actually, I will put them above the land cruiser because the land cruiser will require more land warfare breakthrough points, and these you can get pretty easily because you only need the physics research for these anyway, so you can spend all of your points into nuclear reactors. And I mean, like, nuclear strikes are just so strong now. All of these malices are just insane, especially the repair speed. The thermonuclear bombs pretty much disable an entire state for 2 years. Just because the amount of damage that a thermonuclear bomb does is enough to never repair this. Apart from the amount of research you do, it is actually an S tier. If we just take a look at the damage that it does, am actually gonna put it, yeah, I'm gonna put it into S tier. I wanted to put it into A tier, but now that I think about it, this just disables an entire state. Apart from the manpower, but like, even the resources are heavily affected. I could push with those German divisions and they don't have any strength just because there's nothing here anymore. And the commercial nuclear reactor will also unlock the nuclear engines, and that is kind of hard to rank because they are very strong. Once you have these are pretty much your go-to engines for all of your ships. Now, the downside is that you have to get all of the previous tech that we'd already talked about, plus the commercial nuclear reactor, plus the nuclear engines, and then can you start building ships with the reactors. I believe the carrier is the only one where technically there is an argument to be made to not use the new engines because, number one, the carriers, they don't need more range. The nuclear reactors give you 100% more range, which is very nice, and reduce your fuel cost, give the same amount of speed that the normal reactors give. For all other ship types, they cost the same. For the carriers, they are more expensive, and again, you don't really need the additional range because the carrier already has enough range and the carrier shouldn't drive around alone. So just because of the amount of research you have to invest, it is very hard to rank this fairly. Because going by research, I'd probably put it into C, maybe B tier. You have to keep in mind, by the time that you unlock the nuclear engines, you're either locking the fuck in for a game that goes until 1980, or you don't need the engines anymore. Sure, you reduce the fuel cost, but that alone is not really that amazing. Now, you should always use nuclear engines if you have them, but most of the time. We'll get to that. Yeah, I'm going to put it into B tier. I'd still prefer the Howitzers over this. I mean, it's very cool. It's just, for me, it takes far too long to get it. And the final one is the nuclear warhead. I should almost make another tier list for these, for the rockets. I'll put them into C tier. They're above the Doga. The thing is, they unlock you a special missile that you can use to nuke instead of using strat bombers. But as I said, you can also just use strat bombers, and the strat bombers you can use multiple times. So this is pretty much only there if you, for some reason, haven't invested into air. It's nice that it's here, but realistically, you should just use strat bombers. They're cheaper, and I mean, we'll get to that. Actually, we can already rank EARTHSHAKER bomb. Let's go into B tier, just because it is reusable over the nuclear warhead, so I'm gonna put it into B tier. Now, frankly, I don't care about the EARTHSHAKER bomb. It does the exact same thing that the large bomb bay does, has the same production cost, has the same damage stats, the same weight everywhere. I guess technically it is lighter if you have a strat bomber that also does other things. If you have a tactical bomber that uses strat bombing and then something else, like technically it is lighter for non-strat bombing and not port striking, but it has the same thing. It does cost more agility, but it's pretty much just a large bomb bay that you can replace, and it allows you to use nukes, and that's the one thing that you need it for. So if you use nukes, you can take one of these, either the nuclear warhead or the bounce or the EARTHSHAKER bomb. Helicopters, S tier, give you more supply, give you more manpower. Pretty much in every game I research these. Same thing with radar. Radar is even better than the helicopters because radar you will need every single game. Air detection, otherwise your fighters cannot do anything. And it's very nice because it's cheap to get. It only costs 1 research point and you get coordination as well. So it's just all around a very solid thing to get. Now the bouncing bomb, C tier I guess. Depending on the country you can find use in it, but all it does is unlock dam and bomb lock rates, and like I guess they're neat, mildly useful, but the thing is it only actually is useful if there are dams nearby. So if certain countries don't have dams, then that tech is not gonna do anything. If you have dams, I guess you can use it technically, you know, if you want to bomb Germany into the ground as the US, sure, you can use dam rates. With the Mothership and the jets, we do have to engage a little bit of nerd mode, so please bear with me. The Mothership does have insane stats, you know, a lot of air range, a lot of air attack, nice amount of air defense, but is also very expensive. In these tests, here the Motherships are fighting against some other planes that I created. We could still upgrade those with some Cannon 2s to get more air attack. Technically, the Mothership is winning in this battle, but the longer this thing goes on, the more we can see that that's actually not kind of the case. Because if this thing continues, we can just see that the UK has 4.6 thousand fighters in stockpiles. Now, in terms of war score, we've done more damage, which just means that the Motherships do cost more war score. And yes, the Motherships are winning, but if we tag over to the US, the Mothership stockpiles are not increasing. They're just increasing very slightly and then fluctuating because of the damage roll controls or the weather and all that. And that's also why I don't want to make too much of a test, because it is just absolutely annoying to test this, because so many factors can just influence things. But as you can see, like right now, the motherships are dipping again, and at some point they will also go back up again. The reason for that is kind of tricky to pin down. I did find a Reddit post that claimed that motherships count as 13 fighters, whatever 13 fighters means in this context. And they also talked about combat width for planes, which doesn't exist. Take this with a huge grain of salt. One thing that could mean is that the normal air wing max stat size does not count for motherships. They also mentioned somewhere here that motherships have a separate defines file, which usually, you know, this defines the max amount of stats that your planes can get. Technically, if the mothership was a normal airplane, then the 190 air attack the upgraded mothership has would not matter, because it's above the max, and then it would just cap. There is probably something special going on, because, you know, the air wing size and all that is also different for the motherships. But as you can see, the stockpiles are just depleting. You don't have MIOs for these. The big benefit of the mothership is that it does have a lot of range, but compared to creating your own fighter, it is not as good. I'm gonna put it into high B tier, because a normal fighter is better, but it does have a lot of range, and you know, it's also just brain dead to build. The ideal fighter is still gonna be a small fighter that you design, especially because the fighter that's fighting here is only a modern fighter, and we're gonna get into another fighter in just a minute, which is a supersonic jet. Here we have our MiGs fighting the supersonic jet. They are trading somewhat evenly. The reason for that is, while the supersonic jet does have a lot of stats, they very rarely do get MIOs. Now, the UK does have an MIO because they have the high agility fighters designer, and that one will allow us to maximize the plane a little bit differently, which something like this could work, because, you know, we still are below our 100 air cap, and this allows us to invest a little bit more into defensive tanks instead of just what we have here, which will then outperform modern fighters. But that also leads us into another problem with the supersonic small airframe. The resources that you need. You do need a vast amount of surplus for chromium, and also you do get it very late, because you need all of the jet engines and such. Technically, especially if you have an MAO, it is better, and if you have the resources, it's better. But for most nations, it's not gonna be the case. I guess I will put it, yeah, let's put it here, middle of B, because it can be stronger than your normal fighter designs. It does require you to have a lot of chromium, which, you know, only a very handful of nations have a surplus of chromium, and it is very late. The next thing in the list is the jet engine, which on its own is honestly not worth it. Jet engines, just because of the amount of fuel that you use and the lack of range, still fall into a very weird category where you should just use them for defensive purposes, so you can just ignore them most of the time. But they do unlock the gas turbine, which is the fastest tank engine. And with those, you can build some very fun little fast tanks. Technically, this is the best engine that you can have in the late game. It does cost more fuel than the normal gasoline engine, but I mean, in late game, you can just strap it on. So we're gonna put it into a very low B tier. I do like what you can do with it, but it's also just, you probably don't need the gas engine anymore at this point. And the flying bombs, or the V1 project, is also absolute. It's also just strat bombing. Again, I'm not a huge fan of strat bombing. I don't like the playstyle, but I don't really care about this for the V1s. The cool thing is this unlocks another little tree down here, which unlocks the improved guidance, which will unlock the guided anti-ship missile module for your planes. And that thing is the best torpedo module that you can use. I'm gonna put it into A tier. Not for the V1s. The V1s are absolutely useless, but you know, just for the naval bomber upgrade. The rocket interceptor is also just kind of wasted research, just because rocket engines are just very bad. Technically, they are really good for short range defense, but this thing has a range of 360 kilometers, and that is nothing. This one doesn't even cover all of East Germany, so it's just for the range. It's just so bad. Actually, fuck that. There we go. That's the rock. There we go. I accidentally picked the rocket interceptor instead of that one. Yeah, it's still above those two, because you technically can use it for short range defense, although it's not really that great. Next thing on the list are the Axial Jet Engines, and these guys are really good. They do cost more fuel, and they have a slightly lower range, but the range doesn't really matter. They do have more agility, which is very nice, and more speed, which also results in more agility. Honestly, the Axial engines, they are gonna be your choice, your engine of choice. Also relatively deep into the tree, but still really good. For all of the rest, we can do a lightning round, because it is strat bombing. Strat bombing, strat bombing. I guess it's a nuke replacement, so there we go. Does have more range. Technically, it's better. Now, the Wasserfall project, that is actually actually a scam, because that thing is worse than static AA. Number one, you need to build the rocket sites, which already cost almost 2.5 times as much as AA, as state AA, and these are only available in the state air zone. So while we do have a radius here, we can't select anything. But it's just, you know, like those things, they don't deal that much AA damage to the point where you can justify building the rocket site and then also building the rockets themselves. It does have kind of a use, because you can use it as additional AA if you don't have access to planes, but state AA is just better. That's the problem. Underway replenishment, I guess it's a very high A tier. Underway replenishment can be used if you have fleet in being or base strike. Trade interdiction doesn't get it, which I guess makes sense, because trade interdiction is, you know, the idea is that you have submarines and they intercept convoys. So it wouldn't really make sense for submarines to be supplied via convoys. The idea behind underway replenishment is, instead of your navy having to go to the port to refuel, you can send convoys to refuel, which will increase the range, and that can be very useful. Now, you will use convoys and they can be intercepted. Technically very nice, very useful, and can be upgraded as well with 2 more upgrades here. So if you do need more range, you know, like let's say you are Japan and you don't feel like doing 50 island hops, then for Japan it can make it actually easier to get over to the west coast. So just for that, it's an A tier. If you have a lot of ports or you don't plan on building a navy, then it's useless, but you know, it's navy tech, so it's only going to be useful with navy. Now the proximity fuses, they are an S tier. Yeah, let's put it below helicopters. Proximity fuses themselves give you a little bit of naval attack, naval AA attack, which by itself is nice, but more importantly, it also unlocks the Jizz, which just gives you 20% more soft attack for your artillery and also 10% more for support artillery. And I mean, more soft attack on your artillery is always nice. That thing is insane, because even if you don't have a navy, it is worth it to get this one, because it upgrades your artillery and everybody uses artillery, except for in multiplayer. So, for multiplayer, it's not going to be that useful, but in multiplayer, you do get more AA attack, so... Next thing on the list are the autistic tiles. They are also an S tier. We're actually gonna put them very high up, because with that, your submarines are pretty much invisible. And this is super cool, because the schnorkels you can get with your 1940 submarine. The anechoic tiles you can get with your 1936 submarine. So by the time you have your 1940 submarines, you can already have this. And some nations start with this, so technically you can almost immediately start with researching this. And then, especially against the AI, they are not gonna find your ships ever again, because the schnorkels at best give you 15%. This gives you minus 25%. Now, they do balloon your production costs, which doesn't matter too much because submarines are still very cheap, and they do cost 2 rubber, which is honestly the biggest issue, because not a lot of nations do have a rubber surplus. Malaya, East Indies, Ceylon, and Madagascar, and that's it. But if you can get some rubber going and you don't need it for your planes or your trucks, then these things are just gonna be permanent raiders for you. Now, the Torpedo Cruiser, we can put it into very low B tier. The biggest problem with the Torpedo Cruiser is just that the hull is much more expensive. So between running some torpedo destroyers or torpedo cruisers, the Torpedo Cruiser will be less efficient. One thing that a Torpedo Cruiser compared to a destroyer does offer is having more range. That is very nice. If you like the torpedo playstyle, then you can use Torpedo Cruisers. Because of the hull, it is still going to be much more expensive than a torpedo destroyer. But, you know, if you like the torpedo playstyle and you do need more range, you can use Torpedo Cruisers. In general, torpedo destroyers are still going to be better. Technically, they do have more HP, but honestly, they're screening ships. I don't really care about their HP. They're just there to dodge and scurry around, so we're gonna ignore that. Let's put it right here in the middle of B, just because, you know, I did have to demolish a couple of destroyers that, you know, slowed my navy down, so the additional range would have been helpful there. Not much to say to the Superheavy Battleship. It was a meme, and it still is a meme. It can be super useful and fun to use, because, you know, it is a Superheavy Battleship, and you can get it much earlier now, which does make it a little bit better than before, but it's still a Superheavy Battleship. Moving on over to the modern battleship. If you look at the stats, the speed is very nice. That alone is something that you would research the modern battleship for. All around, it does have slightly better stats. It's not that big of a deal, honestly. The main problem of the modern battleship is the fact, I mean, number one, resources, very, very expensive there. Number two, you do have to get the 1944 heavy ship hull, and then you unlock the special project for the modern battleship, which does mean in 1944 you start a special project to start building a battleship. Now, if you want to get your battleship in 1970, that's fine, but in the average game, that's not going to be something that you're really looking out for, so It just comes in too late, honestly. It's good. It's not that much better than the 1944 ship, and it just comes in very late. And the modern carrier falls into the exact same pitfall because it just costs 1.2k more IC, and you don't get anything otherwise. Sure, you do get more speed, you get more range, you do get better stats, but for a carrier that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters for a carrier is this, and you know, having enough speed so it can keep up with your navy, which it's a carrier, it will always have the most speed anyway. And then the range, as with the engines, this thing does not need more range because it does have the most range out of your navy anyway, so it's gonna be alone, and you don't want your carrier to be alone. Also a snuggly F tier, although it's below the battleship, because the battleship at least has the joy of being a battleship. Now, the ice aircraft carrier. This thing is actually really good. You can put some runway reinforcements on it, which I don't really care about, you know, the weather penalty stuff. But there's something a little bit different about this type of carrier. Over here we have a modern carrier, and as you can see, we can just put in some carrier naval bombers and carrier fighters. Over here we have ice carriers, and for some godforsaken reason, you can put any type of plane on this thing. This means technically you can use your ice carrier for CAS, for strat bombing. We can use this thing to scoot around, and honestly, I believe this is incorrectly coded, because why the fuck can any plane go on this thing? How large is this runway? Just because of the amount of shenanigans you can do with this thing, because now you can use this for strat bombing, and just as a mobile airbase, just because of that, you can have a lot of fun with that thing. And another benefit, all of this was just a little bit of a meme, it's still useful, but another benefit, the ice carrier has a deck size of 30. A normal carrier has a deck size of 20, which means the ice carrier can get 50% more planes into the battle. I assume that was an idea by Paradox, so you can build some runway reinforcements without feeling bad about losing deck size, but honestly, just build this thing. This is amazing! Now, speed, very slow because of all of the deck sizes, but come on! You can't just put so many nav bombers on this thing, and carriers are already your strongest ship. Admittedly, you know, the speed is a little bit of a problem, but come on. If you can have fun with super heavy battleships, you can have fun with ice carriers. Kind of lightning round, we still have the missiles for submarines, and honestly, I don't care. I guess it's strat bombing, there we go. It is neat that you can use this for nuking. I still would use one of the other two tactics, but you know, you can now build some submarines that you can use for strat bombing and nuking, so in that case it's nice that we have it, but still, the other two are my nuke choices of choice. Wait, you know, I honestly forgot about a midget submarine just because it's that bad. Look at the speed, look at the range. This thing has 5 HP. A single shark will kill this thing. And yes, there are sharks in Hearts of Iron. Today you learned. I mean, it's funny to spam, but honestly, just build normal submarines. Air-independent propulsion. These have one big problem. Well, 2, 3. Production cost, range, and fuel usage. The level 1 one I wouldn't ever use. 60 fuel is insane for submarines. And the range, you know, like you can use that thing for a sea lion at best and then nothing more. But if you get that one, you can get 2 other engines, and one of these actually kind of nice. The high-speed Walter engines. Now, they are 15% more expensive. They also cost more fuel. But if you can afford that, you have 10% less sub-visibility on top of your autistic tiles. Plus, this thing also has more speed, which doesn't really matter that much for submarines, but it's still nice to have. Honestly, if you can afford the additional fuel, this is your engine of choice for your submarines. The first one is almost an F tier, but that one we're gonna put into very high A. The cruiser submarines, not that great, much more expensive, do have more range, which is neat. Technically they are better than the 1940 submarine hull, but we're not really interested in the cruiser submarine, because if you compare the cruiser submarine to the fleet submarine, we have another 1 point of sub-visibility docked, plus even more range, plus more HP, although the HP, you know, at that point doesn't really matter anymore with the sub-visibility. These things are practically invisible, and they are so fun to use. And a little bit above that, we do have the nuclear submarine. Now, this does require a lot more investment in terms of research, but it does give you 1 additional slot that you can use for air detection or something. For example, the float planes here is much more expensive. And also, I mean, the range, even more range range. That thing has global range. It can be useful to have that much more range, but the fleet submarine should suffice. And then we still have the nuclear torpedo, which is very expensive. Does have more torpedo hit chance and more torpedo attack. Sure, it lowers your reliability. Reliability for your submarines doesn't really matter that much. Reliability for ships just means that they take more critical damage. If they do take damage, they have a higher chance of taking critical damage. These submarines are not getting hit anyway. And then having more torpedo chance, which is something that's kind of hard to come by. Very good. And the additional torpedo attack. If you can get the nuclear torpedoes, you should use them, but it is something that's very, very, very late in the game, and that's a bit of a bummer. So nuclear torpedoes, just because of the amount of research, we're gonna put it above jet engines. If you can get them, very good, but this is probably one of the last things that you will research, and that's just a bit of a shame. But I mean, it's a nuclear submarine in World War II. Like, it makes sense. Nuclear submarine, just because of the range, it's still in C tier. Cruiser submarine, technically better. Between the cruiser and the 1940 submarine, I would still use the 1940 submarine because of the production cost. So I don't want to put it into F tier. That's kind of mean. It does have more range, so there is usage to this. But the fleet submarine, oh brother, it's hard. I do want to put it into high A tier, but the nukes we have to consider as one blob. And the thing is, nukes are just shutting down the construction of an entire state. There we go. Just as I finished, Merlin joins. So this is the objectively correct tier list for the special projects. There is nothing wrong with this. If there's something wrong, then you are wrong. And also, please don't be mean in the comments. Otherwise, I will have to cry myself to sleep again. Since you seem to have enjoyed this video, why don't you subscribe and watch this video where I ranked every single support company?